Under the dim glow of torchlight and cathedral bells tolling across an empty London skyline, the story begins. The camera moves slowly through the misted streets of Westminster, settling upon the ancient stones of Windsor Castle, their surfaces etched with centuries of ceremony, power, and secrets. A hush falls over the world, and the voice of the narrator emerges, low and deliberate, almost like an invocation. They speak of a queen, the most recognized woman on earth, whose reign spanned 7 decades, whose calm composure became a symbol of stability in an age of chaos. Yet behind the glittering crown, behind the golden carriage and the waving crowds, lies a question few dare to ask aloud. Who was Queen Elizabeth II, truly? Was she merely the constitutional figurehead of a modern state, or was her bloodline the living continuation of something far older, something that reaches back beyond the Tudors, beyond even the Plantagenets, to the dust and legend of the medieval Knights Templar? As the music swells, we see images of the Queen's coronation in 1953, the radiant crown descending upon her head beneath the vaulted arches of Westminster Abbey. The ceremony, ornate and archaic, feels like a survival from another world. The narrator describes it as a rite more ancient than empire, echoing with symbols that scholars still struggle to interpret. For some, it was the last visible trace of a sacred ritual that once belonged to warrior monks who vanished in the shadows of history 7 centuries ago. The Templars, those enigmatic knights of the Holy Land, were said to have uncovered something extraordinary beneath the Temple Mount. Relics, manuscripts, or perhaps knowledge so dangerous it could shake the foundations of the church itself. When they were hunted, burned, and scattered by royal decree, their secrets did not die. Whispers tell of a hidden lineage, a bloodline blessed, cursed, or both, that would endure in silence, weaving itself into the royal houses of Europe. Now the camera pans to Elizabeth's funeral procession, the somber rhythm of drums echoing through the mist. Crowds line the streets, unaware that the symbols surrounding them, the banners, the heraldry, even the order of the rites, are steeped in ancient code. The narrator's tone deepens, inviting the listener to drift between sleep and revelation. What if the Queen's life was not only the closing chapter of a modern monarchy, but also the final page in a story that began with the Templars' flight from persecution? Historians will tell you that the Templars were annihilated in 1307, that their wealth was seized, their leaders executed, their knowledge lost to time. Yet artifacts surface, patterns emerge, and genealogies whisper otherwise. Across the centuries, the same names reappear: Sinclair, Bruce, Stuart, Windsor, linked by blood and bound by secrecy. Each carries marks that trace back to those who once guarded the Holy City. This introduction sets the stage. The documentary is not about conspiracy for its own sake. It is about connections, symbols, and the way truth survives beneath layers of myth. As the narrator's voice slows, almost hypnotic, they promise a journey through archives and ruins, through coronations and cathedrals, to uncover whether Britain's beloved monarch carried within her veins the final echo of a Templar covenant, a pact made in blood, sanctified in secrecy, and hidden in plain sight beneath the splendor of the British crown. The story now turns to the origins of the Knights Templar, an order cloaked in legend and fear, whose very name evokes mystery, wealth, and deadly devotion. Founded in the aftermath of the First Crusade, the Templars were more than mere warriors. They were monks, scholars, and keepers of secrets. From the outset, their purpose seemed simple: to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. But beneath this pious mission lay a far deeper, more enigmatic agenda, one that some historians and occult scholars claim intersected with the fate of kings and the bloodlines of Europe itself. The Templars were said to have discovered something extraordinary beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a place sacred to 3 religions, a site layered with myth and legend. Some say it was the Ark of the Covenant. Others whisper of lost scrolls and relics that revealed hidden knowledge of divine descent. Whether these claims are true remains shrouded in speculation, yet the very persistence of these stories hints at a deeper truth. The Templars were custodians of something the Church could neither control nor allow to be revealed. Their rule of life was austere, yet their influence was profound. They amassed wealth and power across Europe, building fortresses, banks, and entire networks of communication that rivaled kingdoms. Yet their most significant power may have been symbolic. Their claim, whispered in secret, that some bloodlines were sacred, carrying a divine spark. According to esoteric traditions, the Templars believed that the true rulers of Europe, those descended from these holy lines, were not merely monarchs by chance, but chosen vessels of a higher purpose. This was the doctrine of the Sangreal, the royal blood, which later inspired myths of the Holy Grail. In this context, the Templars were not simply warriors or bankers. They were guardians of a divine genealogy. They allegedly traced their knowledge through key families, ensuring that the line of kings and queens would remain unbroken, even when political power shifted. Scotland, France, and England became crucial theaters for this quiet, shadowy work, as noble houses married strategically, often guided by forces invisible to the public eye. Names that would echo through the centuries. Sinclair, de Bouillon, Bruce, carried the coded promise of a sacred inheritance. The order's sudden destruction in 1307 seems, at first glance, absolute. The King of France, Philip IV, jealous of their wealth and fearful of their growing influence, ordered mass arrests. Grand Master Jacques de Molay and countless knights were tortured and executed. The Church publicly condemned the order as heretical, erasing its existence from official records. Yet here is where history and mystery diverge. Evidence suggests that the Templars anticipated such a purge. Their knowledge, their treasures, and perhaps even their sacred genealogical secrets were hidden, smuggled into the hands of trusted allies and noble families. Over the following centuries, whispers persisted, tales of the Templars' survival, their clandestine rituals, and the secret transmission of knowledge through bloodlines. Some historians dismiss these as legend, yet in cryptic manuscripts, cathedral carvings, and Masonic lore, the echoes of Templar thought remain unmistakable. The concept of a holy blood, a lineage intertwined with both political authority and spiritual purpose, took root in the imaginations of kings, scholars, and mystics alike. It is within this framework that we must consider Elizabeth II, a monarch whose reign was defined by dignity, duty, and the quiet exercise of power. Could it be that the Templars' ancient mission, to preserve a sacred bloodline, found its culmination in her life? Could the Queen, consciously or not, have been the living vessel of a lineage stretching back to crusading knights and sacred kings? The evidence is subtle, often symbolic, but when traced across centuries, it begins to form a pattern, one that will unfold as this story continues. In essence, the Templars were the original architects of a hidden history. Their influence extended far beyond the battlefields of the Holy Land, embedding itself into the very blood of European royalty. Understanding their origins, their beliefs, and their secretive practices is crucial for unraveling the next chapter. The journey of their descendants into the houses of kings, and ultimately, into the veins of Queen Elizabeth II herself. The stage is set, and the mystery grows deeper with every turn of history. The Templars' legacy is not merely a tale of knights and crusades. It is a story of lineage, secrecy, and the silent shaping of destiny. Threads that have woven through centuries, waiting for someone to see the pattern. And now, the camera begins to shift from the deserts of Jerusalem and the strongholds of medieval Europe to the rolling hills and ancient castles of Scotland and England, where the hidden bloodline silently persisted, awaiting its modern heir. The story now moves from the sun-baked stones of the Holy Land to the misty landscapes of Europe, where the remnants of the Templar Order found refuge and quietly reshaped the destiny of kingdoms. After the dramatic fall of the Templars in France, many knights fled northward, seeking sanctuary in lands sympathetic to their cause. Scotland became a particularly significant refuge, its rugged highlands and independent clans providing both protection and anonymity. Here, Templar influence intertwined with local nobility, planting seeds that would quietly flourish over centuries. The Sinclair family, whose ancestral home lies in the northern reaches of Scotland, is often cited as a direct link between surviving Templars and later royal lines. Rosslyn Chapel, built in the 15th century by William Sinclair, contains mysterious carvings and cryptic symbols that scholars have long debated. Some believe these designs encode Templar rituals, maps to hidden relics, or genealogical clues meant to preserve a sacred lineage. It is within these carved stones, some argue, that the hidden blueprint of the Templar bloodline first surfaces in Europe. Meanwhile, in France and England, other Templar survivors embedded themselves into noble families, marrying strategically to secure influence and protection. The Bruces, the Plantagenets, and eventually the Stuarts carried both the prestige of royalty and the silent charge of safeguarding an ancient secret. Each generation concealed its legacy beneath the veneer of political necessity, intertwining ambition with devotion to a purpose that transcended kingdoms. These unions were not random. They were deliberate acts of preservation, ensuring that the Templar bloodline would endure even as Europe's political landscape shifted violently. The Tudor dynasty further illustrates this intricate web of lineage. Henry VII's marriage to Elizabeth of York, uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York, can be seen not only as a political maneuver, but as a consolidation of bloodlines tracing back to Templar-influenced noble families. These connections, often dismissed by mainstream historians as mere coincidence, take on a different dimension when viewed through the lens of esoteric genealogy. Symbols and heraldry recurring in royal seals and crests suggest a hidden continuity, a silent recognition of a sacred inheritance. As centuries passed, these families became the custodians of knowledge, ritual, and perhaps even relics that the Templars had once protected. The bloodline itself became a form of coded history, carried in marriage alliances, heraldic symbols, and the quiet teachings of secret societies that arose from Templar philosophy. Scotland's Jacobite movement, often framed purely as political rebellion, may also be understood as an effort to preserve and protect these hidden lines. The Stuarts, exiled yet resilient, maintained the notion that true kingship carried both blood and sacred responsibility, a concept that would echo down to the modern House of Windsor. By the time Elizabeth II was born in 1926, this lineage had been centuries in the making, a network of noble families subtly interwoven with the legacy of the Templars. The Queen's ancestry, tracing through the Stuarts, Plantagenets, and beyond, may represent the culmination of this careful orchestration. Each generational link, each marriage, each symbolic act was a thread in a tapestry that remained hidden from public view, yet vibrant and alive within the veins of the royal family. Even architecture and ritual hint at this continuity. Castles, chapels, and ceremonial sites are not mere symbols of power. They're coded monuments to a history that the general populace has never fully understood. Rosslyn Chapel, Westminster Abbey, and even Windsor Castle contain architectural elements echoing Templar geometry, hidden references that speak to the presence of a sacred lineage quietly shaping history from behind the scenes. In this section of the story, the camera drifts over Scottish Highlands and English manors, tracing the subtle signs of Templar influence embedded in the very landscape. The narrator's voice, slow and deliberate, draws attention to the interweaving of faith, secrecy, and family. Each twist of history, each marriage alliance, each hidden symbol becomes a breadcrumb, leading to a single conclusion. The Templar legacy did not die in 1307. It lived on, reforged through European nobility, patiently waiting to emerge fully in the modern monarchy. Here, the connection becomes tangible. The Templar Knights may have vanished from the public eye, yet their mission, to safeguard a bloodline deemed sacred, was fulfilled through careful planning, centuries of alliances, and the quiet vigilance of noble families. This hidden network would eventually converge on the House of Windsor, making Elizabeth II not just a monarch by law or tradition, but a living heir to a legacy that stretches back to the desert sands of Jerusalem, to the secret chambers beneath the Temple Mount, and to the final strongholds of a vanished order. As the scene closes, the camera pans across the mist-covered hills of Scotland, settling on Rosslyn Chapel, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The narrator's voice lowers almost to a whisper. The Templars fled, their order destroyed, yet their purpose endured. The bloodline they safeguarded silently journeyed across generations, hidden in plain sight, until it found its guardian in the Queen of England. And now, we are on the threshold of discovering how this ancient covenant finally reached its modern heir. The story now turns to the intricate web of royal genealogy, a hidden tapestry that has been carefully woven over centuries, often concealed behind layers of official record-keeping, secrecy, and deliberate obfuscation. For the casual observer, the British royal family appears straightforward, a lineage of monarchs passed from parent to child, anchored by well-documented historical events. Yet beneath this surface lies a far more complex reality, one where marriages, alliances, and even personal choices were influenced by the preservation of a sacred bloodline, a lineage that some claim stretches back to the Templars themselves. Tracing this genealogy requires patience and attention to detail. The Queen's paternal ancestry leads directly through the House of Windsor, formerly the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, itself an offshoot of continental European royalty. Her maternal lineage, the Bosleyan family, intersects with Scottish nobility, many of whom claim descent from medieval knights and aristocrats associated with Templar influence. When these two streams merge, a fascinating pattern emerges, a consolidation of families historically tied to secret orders, ancient covenants, and mystical traditions. Symbols, heraldry, and even obscure traditions embedded in these families hint at a deliberate safeguarding of a sacred legacy. Coats of arms, often dismissed as decorative or ceremonial, contain subtle nods to the Templar heritage. Crosses, geometric patterns, and iconography that echo crusader motifs. Heralds and chroniclers of old carefully encoded information into these designs, allowing future generations to recognize their place in the hidden lineage. Marriages were not purely political. They were also symbolic acts, ensuring that the bloodline remained pure, protected, and intact across tumultuous centuries. The Stuart line, in particular, offers compelling evidence of continuity. Though they were exiled, persecuted, and at times deposed, the Stuarts maintained a secret network of alliances that preserved their sacred inheritance. Connections to Scottish nobility and Templar sympathizers created a lineage that persisted despite political upheaval. When this line converged with the German and English royal houses in the 19th and 20th centuries, the Templar legacy quietly threaded its way into the veins of the future queen. It is also within hidden archives, some accessible only to scholars, others still sealed or lost, that genealogical clues appear most clearly. Vatican records, Freemasonic manuscripts, and obscure European nobility charts contain references to families entrusted with protecting sacred bloodlines. Though mainstream historians often dismiss these as coincidences or symbolic storytelling, Patterns emerge when the data is carefully analyzed. Recurring names, repeated alliances, and strategic marriages that align with centuries-old mystical traditions. In addition to the family trees themselves, rituals, ceremonial roles, and private customs preserved within the royal household also speak to an esoteric continuity. Some historians suggest that these practices, often framed as traditional court etiquette, may encode knowledge of sacred ancestry and Templar philosophy. Even the Queen's personal interests in history, art, and ceremonial orders hint at a conscious acknowledgement, or at least an intuitive recognition, of her unique place within a lineage much older and more symbolic than her public persona would suggest. The broader European context reinforces this notion. Across France, Germany, and Italy, noble houses intermarried in ways that preserve strategic and mystical connections. Certain families consistently appear as keepers of tradition, with documented involvement in secret societies, chivalric orders, and religious institutions. Tracing these connections illuminates a network that spans centuries and continents, converging in the British monarchy. The Queen, therefore, can be seen as the culmination of a deliberate centuries-long effort to protect and perpetuate a bloodline steeped in both history and myth. Even the physical spaces associated with these families bear the marks of a hidden legacy. Castles, manors, and estates often incorporate cryptic symbols, secret rooms, and architectural motifs that reflect an awareness of sacred lineage. Within these spaces, rituals were performed, knowledge transmitted, and genealogical continuity quietly preserved, unseen by the public eye, yet living in the family itself. The cumulative effect of these centuries of careful preservation is striking. The Queen's ancestry is more than a list of notable names. It is a living testament to a lineage charged with symbolic significance. Each branch of her family tree represents a deliberate choice to safeguard knowledge, protect sacred heritage, and maintain a bloodline thought to carry divine or mystical importance. The more one examines the records, the more it becomes clear that this lineage was no accident. It was curated, protected, and ultimately entrusted to Elizabeth II. By tracing this genealogy, we gain not only historical insight, but also a deeper understanding of the mystery itself. The Templar connection, the careful selection of alliances, and the symbolic markers encoded into family lines all converge in a way that transforms the Queen's ancestry from a series of historical facts into a living story of legacy, secrecy, and sacred duty. This hidden genealogy provides the foundation for everything that follows, setting the stage for the next revelation. The symbols, artifacts, and ceremonies that further confirm the Queen's extraordinary connection to a lineage preserved through centuries of secrecy and devotion. The story now turns to the crown jewels, artifacts that have become icons of monarchy, yet may hold secrets far older than the throne itself. To the casual observer, these objects are symbols of national pride and ceremonial tradition. Glittering crowns, scepters, orbs, and rings designed to dazzle and impress. But for those who look closer, the crown jewels may reveal a hidden language of power and lineage, one that speaks directly to the idea of a sacred bloodline guarded for centuries. Every gem, cross, and inscription tells a story, and in the case of Queen Elizabeth II, these stories may echo the teachings and symbols of the Knights Templar. Take the sovereign's scepter with cross, for example. Crafted in the early 20th century but based on centuries-old designs, it contains a diamond of extraordinary size and clarity, the Cullinan Eye, known as the Great Star of Africa. Beyond its monetary value, esoteric scholars suggest that its placement and orientation are deliberate, corresponding to celestial alignments that reflect ancient Templar cosmology. The cross atop the scepter is not merely Christian iconography. Its precise angles and symmetry echo the Jerusalem cross, a symbol closely associated with the Templars. Every detail, from the positioning of gemstones to the choice of metal, is imbued with significance meant to communicate legitimacy, divine favor, and connection to a sacred lineage. The imperial state crown, worn by Queen Elizabeth II during her coronation and state occasions, offers further clues. Its arches, encrusted with nearly 3,000 diamonds and 270 pearls, are said to trace geometric patterns familiar to alchemists and Templar initiates. The arrangement is not random. Some historians and esoteric researchers argue that it mirrors celestial diagrams and ancient cryptographic symbols used by the Templars to encode knowledge about lineage, spiritual hierarchy, and divine authority. The crown thus becomes more than ceremonial regalia. It is a coded statement, declaring the wearer's connection to an unbroken chain of sacred authority. Then there is the coronation spoon, a slender silver artifact used to anoint the monarch. Dating back to the 12th century, it survived centuries of political upheaval, including the English Civil War and Cromwell's iconoclasm. Its continued use suggests more than tradition. It may symbolize continuity with an older, secret ritual. Scholars note parallels between the anointing oil and Templar consecration practices, where oil represented both spiritual purification and the transfer of sacred authority. In this sense, Elizabeth II's coronation becomes not only a public display of monarchy, but a reenactment of an ancient ritual that connects her to centuries of custodianship over a sacred lineage. Gemstones themselves carry layered meanings. Rubies symbolize nobility and protection. Sapphires signify wisdom and divine favor. Pearls are said to reflect purity and spiritual illumination. In the context of the crown jewels, these stones may function as more than decoration. They may encode messages about bloodlines, virtue, and divine right. The particular combination and placement of gems and crowns, scepters, and orbs could be read as a visual cipher, one that speaks of continuity and hidden authority rather than mere ceremonial grandeur. Art historians and cryptographers have long speculated about the presence of secret messages embedded in regalia. For example, certain crosses feature subtle engravings that are almost invisible to the naked eye. Geometric patterns appear on the undersides of ceremonial plates, subtly reflecting Templar numerology. Even the choice of materials, from the gold sourced from ancient mines to the rare gems imported from far-off lands, may reflect a deliberate connection to sacred geography, linking the British monarchy to sites of spiritual significance in Europe and the Holy Land. The crown jewels also serve as instruments of power, not just symbols. Their display reinforces hierarchy and authority, but beneath that public function, they also encode lineage. Each time Elizabeth II ascended the throne, she physically touched objects shaped and blessed to carry the weight of centuries. The ritual was an affirmation not only of political leadership, but of a sacred inheritance, passed through generations. A long line, some claim, were preserved by the Templars themselves. In this sense, the jewels are not only ornamental. They are living artifacts, repositories of knowledge and sacred trust. The more one examines the crown jewels in this light, the more they appear as an intricate tapestry of art, symbolism, and coded messaging. Every curve, jewel, and engraving is potentially deliberate, an echo of Templar practices refined over centuries to protect sacred truths. These artifacts bridge the gap between myth and reality, providing physical evidence that a lineage imbued with spiritual and political significance has endured. In tracing the symbolism within these objects, the viewer begins to see a pattern emerge, a deliberate and continuous assertion of legitimacy, authority, and sacred connection. The Templars' influence may not be overt, yet it lingers invisibly in gold and diamond, shaping ceremonies, guiding hands, and reinforcing an ancient bloodline. Queen Elizabeth II, standing before these jewels in 1953, was not merely performing a coronation. She was engaging with a continuum of history, ritual, and secret tradition, an heir to a legacy far deeper than the palace walls or the throne could ever fully reveal. As the camera pans slowly over the crown jewels, catching the sparkle of diamonds and the warm gleam of gold, the narrator's voice draws the viewer into reflection. These are not mere symbols of power. They are guardians themselves, silent witnesses to a history hidden in plain sight, a lineage that whispers through the ages, waiting for its modern custodian to rise. And for Elizabeth II, that custodian was herself. The narrative now shifts to the House of Windsor itself, exploring the ways in which Britain's modern monarchy has preserved the aura of ancient chivalry while masking a far older, hidden lineage. On the surface, the Windsors appear to be a conventional royal family, dignified, measured, and bound by centuries of tradition. Yet behind the pomp and ceremony lies a carefully maintained network of symbolism, ritual, and subtle affiliations that connect the family to centuries of secret orders, spiritual societies, and perhaps even the Templar legacy itself. Elizabeth II's reign, which spanned over 7 decades, was marked by an almost uncanny adherence to ceremonial precision. Every public appearance, every meeting with foreign dignitaries, and every engagement in state ritual carried layers of meaning. Observers might see only protocol, but esoteric scholars argue that these actions are echoes of Templar and chivalric codes preserved through centuries. The Queen's behavior, her gestures, and her choice of ceremonial dress all reflect a deep awareness, conscious or instinctive, of a role far greater than that of a constitutional monarch. She embodied, in many ways, the living symbol of an ancient covenant that stretches back through medieval Europe. One of the clearest links to this hidden tradition is the revival and careful maintenance of chivalric orders. The Order of the Garter, founded in the 14th century, is often cited as Britain's oldest and most prestigious order of knighthood. While publicly framed as a celebration of loyalty and service, its rituals, symbols, and membership rules echo medieval secret societies. Knights of the Garter swear allegiance not only to the monarch, but to a principle of sacred duty that has changed little in hundreds of years. Elizabeth II's role as sovereign of the order situates her at the heart of this continuum, linking her personally to centuries of symbolic guardianship and the esoteric traditions embedded within the British aristocracy. Beyond the Order of the Garter, Elizabeth II maintained ties to other chivalric and ceremonial institutions that carry hidden meaning. The Order of St. John, the Royal Victorian Order, and the various lesser-known orders of knighthood all reinforce her position as the apex of a network of sacred tradition. Through her participation and oversight, the Queen maintained continuity with centuries of ritualized authority, a living bridge between medieval ideals of sacred kingship and the modern state. Even seemingly ceremonial roles, such as presiding over the trooping of the color, can be interpreted as coded gestures rooted in martial and spiritual heritage. Freemasonry, often associated with secrecy and esoteric knowledge, also intersects with the Windsor legacy. While Elizabeth II herself was not a Freemason, many members of her family, advisors, and ceremonial partners were closely linked to Masonic lodges and related societies. Scholars note parallels between Masonic rituals, symbols, and the ceremonial practices of the monarchy, suggesting a shared language of geometry, numerology, and spiritual hierarchy. Through these connections, the Queen's role as head of state may also have carried subtle spiritual dimensions, positioning her as a symbolic guardian of traditions that extend far beyond Britain's borders. Even the architecture and layout of royal residences reflect this blend of power and symbolism. Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, and Balmoral are more than grand homes. They're monuments to authority, continuity, and hidden knowledge. Private chambers, ceremonial halls, and hidden passages may have served practical purposes, but they also encode centuries of esoteric design principles, reflecting geometry and symmetry familiar to initiates of Templar, Masonic, and chivalric orders. Each space reinforces hierarchy, preserves ritual knowledge, and signals continuity to those attuned to its meaning. The Queen's personal habits, interests, and patronages further underscore her role as a guardian of hidden tradition. Her deep engagement with history, art, and ceremonial orders suggests more than cultural curiosity. It hints at an intuitive recognition of her place within a lineage charged with sacred responsibility. From commissioning commemorative medals to attending ritualized ceremonies, Elizabeth II consistently reinforced her symbolic role as both monarch and custodian of a hidden legacy. Taken together, the House of Windsor appears less as a modern institution and more as a living embodiment of medieval chivalric ideals, carefully adapted to contemporary circumstances. Elizabeth II was not merely a figurehead. She was the nexus of centuries of continuity, embodying principles that the Templars and other secretive orders once protected with their lives. The family's public face, duty, ceremony, and service masks a complex network of symbolic authority, ritualized power, and guardianship of a sacred lineage. As the camera pans across Buckingham Palace during state ceremonies, the narrator draws the viewer's attention to subtleties often overlooked: the precise arrangement of guards, the choreography of movement, the placement of banners and symbols. All of these gestures are part of a hidden code, a ceremonial language that speaks to loyalty, hierarchy, and sacred duty. In this light, the Queen's life and reign can be seen as a performance of continuity, a conscious or unconscious enactment of a legacy that reaches back to the vanished Templar order and beyond, tying the House of Windsor to a lineage far older and more profound than ordinary history records. The section closes with a reflection on the paradox of visibility and secrecy. Elizabeth II's life was one of unparalleled public exposure, yet every gesture, every ritual, and every act of service carried private significance. Through her, the ideals of chivalry, sacred guardianship, and symbolic continuity persisted in modern Britain, a subtle but powerful thread connecting the present monarchy to the hidden lineage of the Templars and their centuries-old mission. The story now turns northward to Scotland, a land of misty highlands, ancient castles, and enduring secrets. It was here, far from the prying eyes of kings and popes, that the surviving Templars are believed to have found refuge and quietly nurtured their legacy. Scotland's rugged terrain and fiercely independent clans offered a safe harbor, allowing secret knowledge, rituals, and bloodlines to persist in relative obscurity. Over centuries, these hidden threads interwove with the local nobility, creating connections that would echo down through generations and eventually link to the House of Windsor. Central to this connection is the Stuart dynasty, whose history is inseparable from both Scotland and the Templars. The Stuarts, exiled and embattled at times, maintained a network of alliances with families rumored to harbor Templar influence. These alliances were not merely political. They were a form of guardianship, ensuring that sacred bloodlines remained protected despite wars, dynastic upheavals, and religious persecution. Each union reinforced the continuity of a lineage that, some claim, carried the wisdom, symbols, and even the mission of the ancient Templar Knights. Freemasonry, which flourished in Scotland long before spreading globally, serves as another link in this chain. Scottish lodges preserved esoteric teachings that echo Templar philosophy, numerology, geometry, sacred rituals, and the principle of guarding hidden knowledge. Some historians argue that Freemasonry was not an invention of the 17th century, but a continuation of Templar ideals, repurposed for secrecy and survival. The Scottish Rite, in particular, is viewed as a symbolic extension of the Templars' mission, codifying knowledge of sacred bloodlines and moral codes that guided both secular and spiritual life. Elizabeth II, as a descendant of these intertwined Scottish and English lineages, may have inherited more than royal authority. She may have inherited the spiritual and symbolic legacy preserved in these secretive networks. Rosslyn Chapel, perhaps Scotland's most enigmatic architectural treasure, offers tangible evidence of this connection. Built by William Sinclair in the 15th century, the chapel is adorned with intricate carvings, some depicting biblical scenes, others featuring geometric patterns, cryptic symbols, and figures that remain difficult to interpret. Esoteric researchers suggest that these carvings encode the history of Templar survival and the safeguarding of sacred bloodlines. The chapel may have functioned as a repository of knowledge, a spiritual stronghold, and a symbolic marker of a lineage entrusted with a mission that spanned continents and centuries. The union of Scottish and English royal houses over time further strengthened these hidden connections. Strategic marriages were carefully orchestrated to consolidate power while preserving sacred lineage. For example, the eventual merging of Stuart lines with other European dynasties ensured the continuation of bloodlines that had carried Templar influence. These carefully maintained connections were not random coincidences of aristocratic strategy. They were deliberate acts of preservation, a way to ensure that the spiritual and symbolic mission of the Templars could continue despite the loss of their formal order. Scotland's influence on the House of Windsor is subtle but profound. Many of the ceremonial orders, rituals, and even aspects of heraldry that appear in a monarchy today have roots in Scottish traditions, themselves shaped by centuries of Templar and esoteric influence. Symbols that might seem purely decorative, crosses, geometric patterns, animals, or inscriptions, often have deeper meaning when traced back to Scottish and Templar contexts. They represent continuity, guardianship, and the survival of knowledge that has been carefully concealed for generations. Elizabeth II's connection to Scotland was not merely geographical or political. Through her ancestry, she was linked to the custodians of a lineage that had survived wars, religious persecution, and political upheaval. The Scottish roots of her family carried symbolic weight, connecting her to the traditions of the Stuart kings, the secretive lodges of the Scottish Rite, and the esoteric teachings that the Templars had preserved in exile. Her reign can therefore be seen not only as a continuation of the monarchy, but as the modern embodiment of centuries of spiritual and symbolic guardianship. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that the Templar legacy in Scotland was more than myth or legend. It shaped the very structure of noble alliances, influenced ritual and ceremony, and ensured the survival of a sacred lineage. Elizabeth II stands at the confluence of these currents, her life and reign bridging the past and present, the visible monarchy and the hidden traditions that underpin it. Scotland, with its castles, chapels, and misty landscapes, emerges as both a physical and symbolic haven for the continuity of a bloodline that has been preserved through secrecy, ritual, and devotion. The camera lingers on Rosslyn Chapel at sunrise, its carvings bathed in golden light before sweeping over the highlands, castles, and ancient forests. The narrator's voice intones slowly. In Scotland, the echoes of the Templars never truly faded. They endured in stone, in ritual, and in blood. And through these enduring legacies, the path to the modern crown was quietly, inexorably laid. The focus now shifts to the coronation of Elizabeth II, an event that, on the surface, appears as the culmination of a lifetime of duty and ceremony. Yet beneath the pomp and public spectacle lies a ritual of profound historical and symbolic significance, one that resonates with echoes of the medieval rites of kingship and the secret traditions preserved by the Templars. The coronation was not merely a political event. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual that intertwined sacred symbolism, ancient precedent, and the continuity of a lineage considered by some scholars to be holy or at least spiritually significant. On June 2, 1953, Westminster Abbey became the stage for this intricate drama. The ceremonial procession, the anointing, the crowning, and the taking of oaths all followed centuries-old protocols, each step carefully choreographed to convey legitimacy, authority, and divine favor. The throne, the altar, the vestments, and the regalia themselves were not chosen randomly. Every object, from the coronation spoon to the sovereign scepter, carried symbolic weight, many elements tracing back to Templar or chivalric traditions. The audience, both in the abbey and via live broadcast, witnessed a carefully constructed display of continuity, but few realized that the ritual itself may have been a modern reenactment of ancient ceremonies, echoing sacred principles preserved in secrecy for centuries. The anointing of the Queen was perhaps the most profound moment of the ceremony. Hidden behind the ornate canopy, the Archbishop of Canterbury poured holy oil over Elizabeth's hands, chest, and head, a gesture laden with spiritual significance. In medieval times, such anointings were believed to confer divine favor, an invisible yet potent force that sanctified the monarch and reinforced their role as God's appointed ruler. Some historians and esoteric researchers argue that this rite preserves elements of Templar consecration, in which initiates or sacred leaders were purified and symbolically bound to a higher purpose. The ritual oil itself, carried through generations, may symbolize continuity of spiritual authority, linking Elizabeth II directly to a lineage that stretches back centuries. The coronation oath, taken with solemnity, was more than a pledge to govern according to law and tradition. Its words, steeped in history, reflect an acknowledgement of a higher duty to protect the faith, uphold justice, and safeguard the continuity of a sacred covenant. Within these oaths lies a subtle but profound echo of the responsibilities entrusted to custodians of sacred bloodlines. To the initiated, the ceremony is both public affirmation and private acknowledgement, a declaration of allegiance to a tradition that transcends politics and enters the realm of the mystical. The ceremonial garments, too, carry hidden meaning. The robe of estate, the velvet and ermine cloak, and the coronation regalia are adorned with symbols and patterns that echo heraldic traditions dating back to medieval Europe. Some researchers suggest that these designs preserve coded references to Templar ideals, crosses, geometric shapes, and emblematic animals that signify protection, divine favor, and sacred lineage. Each stitch, each jewel, each emblem is a subtle reinforcement of authority and continuity, an enduring link between the Queen and the centuries of guardianship that preceded her. The coronation was also rich with references to continuity and resurrection. Bells rang, choirs sang, and processions moved in precise choreography, evoking the pageantry of centuries of monarchs, yet simultaneously hinting at a deeper symbolism: the passing of responsibility, the reaffirmation of a sacred bloodline, and the merging of temporal and spiritual authority. The placement of participants, the order of ceremonial acts, and even the architecture of Westminster Abbey contributed to a ritual that is both public spectacle and hidden transmission of tradition. Moreover, the presence of clergy, nobles, and representatives of ancient orders, many with ancestral ties to Templar sympathizers or chivalric societies, reinforced the hidden dimension of the ceremony. Their roles were not merely ceremonial. They acted as witnesses to continuity, participants in a ritual that may have been designed to acknowledge the sacred responsibilities Elizabeth II inherited by birth. The convergence of these actors, artifacts, and gestures forms a tableau that is more than political theater. It is a carefully preserved ritual language, one that speaks to legitimacy, lineage, and the weight of a sacred trust. Even the lighting, music, and spatial orientation within Westminster Abbey were deliberate. Sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, the acoustics of the vaulted ceilings, and the alignment of the throne with ancient markers all contributed to an atmosphere charged with spiritual and symbolic resonance. Observers might experience awe and reverence, unaware that these effects were carefully designed to amplify the ritual's hidden significance. To those attuned to its subtleties, the coronation became a living bridge between past and present, a ritual moment where history, legend, and bloodline converged. The queen's crowning, the moment the imperial state crown touched her head, served as the culmination of this sacred choreography. In that instant, Elizabeth II was not merely a constitutional monarch. She was a symbolic continuation of a lineage that some believe stretches back to the Templars and beyond. The crown itself, heavy with jewels and symbolism, represents both the visible authority of the throne and the invisible weight of centuries of guardianship, a tangible reminder that power, duty, and sacred trust are inseparable. As the coronation concluded, Elizabeth II emerged not just as a sovereign of a nation, but as the embodiment of continuity, ritual, and hidden lineage. The ceremony, in its meticulous attention to detail and symbolic resonance, reinforced the notion that the monarchy is more than political authority. It is a living tradition, a sacred covenant, and perhaps a modern manifestation of centuries of esoteric knowledge. The coronation remains a profound reminder that every gesture, every object, and every word carries the weight of history. And for Elizabeth II, the responsibility extended far beyond the public eye, into the realm of hidden legacy and enduring sacred duty. The narrative now turns toward the Vatican, a silent and imposing presence in the history of Europe's royal and religious networks. While Britain and the Catholic Church have often appeared as political opposites, divided by centuries of reform, rebellion, and revolution, a closer look at their interactions suggests subtle, hidden channels of acknowledgement, particularly when it comes to matters of sacred lineage and symbolic authority. For centuries, the Vatican has been both a recorder and a guardian of secret knowledge. Its archives containing correspondences, treaties, and documents that hint at an awareness of royal bloodlines carrying more than mere political significance. Throughout history, monarchs who could claim sacred lineage, particularly those tied to crusading orders like the Templars, were treated with a mix of deference and caution by the papacy. Kings and queens were often seen as not only temporal rulers, but as custodians of spiritual and mystical authority, a responsibility that required careful recognition, subtle negotiation, and, at times, deliberate silence. In this context, the British monarchy's connection to a hidden Templar lineage could have been an unspoken matter of Vatican awareness, acknowledged quietly through ceremonial respect, diplomatic channels, and symbolic gestures rather than overt statements. One example of this subtle acknowledgement can be found in the records of papal correspondences during the reigns of Elizabeth II's predecessors. Though largely inaccessible to the public, historians note references to European royalty in ways that suggest awareness of sacred bloodlines. These references, often couched in legalistic or ceremonial language, may have carried coded meaning for those familiar with esoteric traditions. They hint at a recognition that some monarchs, while politically Protestant or secular, were nonetheless linked to spiritual legacies that the Church considered significant. The Vatican's relationship with Britain in the 20th century further illustrates this quiet diplomacy. Following the Second World War, alliances between Britain and the Vatican were shaped not only by politics, but also by shared interests in maintaining continuity and stability across Europe. Some researchers speculate that part of this shared interest extended to protecting the knowledge of sacred bloodlines, ensuring that powerful lineages like the House of Windsor remained intact and unexposed to disruption. In this view, Elizabeth II's reign was not only a matter of national sovereignty, but also an element in a broader, historically layered understanding of legitimacy and sacred authority. Art, architecture, and ceremonial gestures also suggest Vatican acknowledgement of these subtle connections. Visits to papal ceremonies, exchanges of gifts, and participation in rituals with deep historical roots all hint at an understanding that monarchy and spiritual custodianship were intertwined. While the Vatican never made explicit statements about any Templar connection, the consistency of symbolic recognition in art, inscriptions, and ceremonial treatment indicates that the Church may have quietly sanctioned or at least acknowledged the continuity of sacred lineage through the British monarchy. Even heraldry and symbolic motifs reinforce this idea. The use of crosses, lions, fleurs-de-lis, and other emblems in royal regalia and official documents can be traced not only to medieval European tradition, but also to the visual language of the Church and its awareness of noble lineages. In some cases, the Vatican's acceptance of these symbols may have acted as a subtle endorsement of legitimacy, a way to recognize continuity without triggering political conflict or public controversy. This silent acknowledgement becomes particularly compelling when considered alongside historical events that threaten the continuity of royal bloodlines. Wars, exiles, and dynastic crises often coincided with Vatican diplomacy or intervention. While publicly framed in political or religious terms, these actions may also have served a deeper purpose, ensuring that sacred lineages, perhaps including the Hidden Templar bloodline, were preserved through turbulent periods. Elizabeth II's eventual ascent to the throne, therefore, can be seen as the culmination of centuries of subtle guidance, oversight, and protection by multiple institutions, including the Vatican. In sum, the Vatican's role is one of quiet observation and discreet acknowledgement. The Church's archives, its ceremonies, and its diplomatic engagements suggest a deep awareness of the sacred dimensions of European royalty. Elizabeth II's life and reign, while outwardly defined by national duty and public service, may also have been silently recognized as the continuation of a sacred lineage, bridging centuries of hidden knowledge, ritual, and spiritual authority. As the camera pans over the Vatican's towering basilicas, the golden domes glowing in the setting sun, the narrator intones, "The Church, in its quiet authority, saw more than the political pageantry of monarchs. It recognized the currents of blood and ritual, the echoes of ancient orders, and the guardianship of a lineage that has endured in silence." Elizabeth II was part of that story, a story the world was never meant to see. The narrative now delves into the esoteric symbolism that pervades the British monarchy, revealing a layer of meaning that often goes unnoticed by the public. Symbols, rituals, and traditions within the royal household are not merely decorative or ceremonial. Many are deliberate echoes of ancient codes, philosophical principles, and secret knowledge preserved over centuries. In this light, the monarchy becomes more than a political institution. It transforms into a living repository of Templar ideals, sacred geometry, and hidden lineage. Take, for instance, the recurring motifs found in royal heraldry. Lions, crosses, fleur-de-lis, and geometric patterns are not only artistic choices, but symbols deeply rooted in medieval iconography and chivalry tradition. To the initiated, these motifs convey messages about power, legitimacy, and divine favor. Some scholars argue that they also encode awareness of a sacred bloodline, signaling to those who understand their meaning that the monarchy is a continuation of a lineage with spiritual significance. The consistency of these symbols across centuries suggests intentional preservation, not coincidence. Architecture further reinforces this hidden narrative. Palaces, chapels, and even royal estates are imbued with sacred geometry, proportions, angles, and alignments that mirror Templar and Masonic principles. Westminster Abbey, Windsor Castle, and Balmoral are not only practical or ceremonial spaces. They are structured to convey hierarchy, sanctity, and continuity. The placement of thrones, altars, and ceremonial halls often follows geometric patterns intended to evoke spiritual resonance. These designs are a language, one that communicates lineage and authority to those attuned to its meaning while remaining invisible to the untrained eye. Rituals performed within the monarchy also carry hidden significance. Events such as trooping the color, the state opening of parliament, and even private family ceremonies preserve elements of ancient rites. Some researchers suggest that these rituals echo Templar consecrations, medieval oaths, and sacred practices designed to reinforce the moral and spiritual responsibilities of leadership. When Elizabeth II participated in these rituals, she was not simply performing tradition. She was enacting a continuum of sacred guardianship, reinforcing her role as custodian of a lineage with roots in Europe's secretive past. Even the Queen's personal choices reflected symbolic continuity. Her use of colors, jewelry, and ceremonial attire frequently drew upon established codes. For example, royal colors such as purple and red have long been associated with sovereignty and spiritual authority. Certain pieces of jewelry, particularly those worn during significant ceremonies, contain motifs that echo medieval symbolism, crosses, stars, and geometric patterns that reinforce the notion of lineage, divine favor, and hidden knowledge. Beyond the visible, esoteric symbolism extends into more subtle forms. Hand gestures, the arrangement of objects during ceremonies, and even the choreography of processions. These acts may appear mundane or strictly procedural, but to those versed in Templar, Masonic, or chivalric traditions, they communicate allegiance, continuity, and the safeguarding of sacred principles. Elizabeth II, whether consciously or intuitively, performed these gestures in a manner consistent with centuries of hidden tradition, embodying the responsibilities of a lineage that extends far beyond the public eye. The monarchy's connection to secret orders further amplifies this symbolic significance. While much of this influence remains speculative, historical links between royal families, chivalric orders, and esoteric societies are well documented. The Order of the Garter, the Order of the Thistle, and other ceremonial organizations maintain rituals and codes that are centuries old, reinforcing hierarchy, loyalty, and spiritual responsibility. Elizabeth II's leadership over these institutions positioned her as the apex of a symbolic network that spans continents and generations, echoing the hidden guardianship once associated with the Templars. Even the use of public ceremonies as symbolic displays contributes to this esoteric continuity. Coronations, jubilees, and state events are choreographed to project authority, order, and legitimacy. Yet embedded within these spectacles are coded references to historical precedents, sacred responsibility, and the hidden lineage of those who rule. The repetition of ritual, alignment of participants, and placement of objects communicate more than power. They affirm continuity, invoke sacred authority, and link the present to a long-forgotten past. Through these symbols, rituals, and architectural choices, Elizabeth II becomes more than a figurehead. She is a living embodiment of a lineage, a nexus where centuries of hidden knowledge converge. Every gesture, every piece of regalia, and every ceremonial act reinforces continuity, signaling that the monarchy is not merely a political entity, but a guardian of sacred tradition. As the camera lingers on Westminster Abbey, Windsor Castle, and the ceremonial pageantry of the monarchy, the narrator intones, symbols are the language of the unseen. Within every arch, every jewel, and every ritual, a hidden story speaks of lineage, legacy, and a covenant preserved across centuries. Elizabeth II, whether knowingly or not, carried this story forward, a living link between the past and the present, the hidden and the visible, the sacred and the temporal. The narrative now turns to ancient prophecies, legends, and mystical writings that have long been associated with the Templars and their supposed sacred bloodlines. Across Europe, from the deserts of Jerusalem to the misty highlands of Scotland, stories emerged that spoke of a lineage destined to endure through trials, persecution, and upheaval. These texts, some preserved in monastic libraries, others hidden in private collections or encrypted within symbolic carvings, hint at a continuity of purpose, a family chosen, protected, and guided by forces beyond the ordinary sweep of history. One such prophecy, often attributed to medieval seers and chroniclers, speaks of a guardian of the covenant, a figure who would carry a sacred line forward when the world itself seemed unaware. While skeptics dismiss these writings as allegorical, many scholars and esoteric researchers note the precision with which names, locations, and lineages are encoded. Across centuries, these prophecies repeatedly reference royal houses in England and Scotland, describing marriages, alliances, and symbols in ways that seem astonishingly prescient. Some argue that Elizabeth II, through her ancestry and her ceremonial role, fulfills aspects of these predictions, embodying the continuation of a sacred covenant first entrusted to the Knights Templar. The symbolism within these prophecies often intertwines with Christian mysticism, alchemy, and Templar numerology. Numbers, dates, and sequences are repeated across texts, linking seemingly unrelated events and individuals into a cohesive pattern. For instance, genealogical connections between the Stuarts, Sinclairs, and other noble families frequently align with symbolic numbers found in prophetic manuscripts, numbers associated with divine favor, protection, or spiritual awakening. These connections suggest that the bloodlines themselves were understood as carriers of destiny, their survival a matter of both earthly strategy and mystical significance. Art, architecture, and relics often serve as complementary elements to these prophecies. Rosslyn Chapel, for example, has been interpreted by esoteric scholars as a physical manifestation of Templar prophecy, a coded repository of lineage, knowledge, and spiritual symbolism. The carvings depict figures, celestial symbols, and geometric patterns that correspond to historical accounts of the Templar mission and their guardianship of sacred bloodlines. In this sense, prophecy is not merely written word. It is encoded in stone, design, and ritual, waiting for the right heir to bring it into fulfillment. European chronicles also preserve the notion of a bloodline chosen to maintain the balance between spiritual authority and earthly power. While the general public was often unaware of these subtleties, nobles and initiates understood that the survival of certain lineages was paramount. The convergence of Elizabeth II's ancestry through English, Scottish, and continental European families matches descriptions found in these prophecies, reinforcing the idea that her birth and reign were anticipated in ways that transcend mere coincidence. Even the Vatican, while publicly neutral, may have been aware of these prophetic currents. Through careful observation, diplomacy, and archival preservation, the Church maintained knowledge of sacred lineages and ceremonial rites, ensuring that key figures, like the Queen, remained aligned with historical and spiritual expectations. The subtle acknowledgement of continuity, through ceremonial recognition, correspondence, and ritual deference, suggests that prophecy and reality were quietly interwoven behind the scenes. Beyond Europe, some Templar writings hint at global implications. Codices and manuscripts suggest that the guardian of the covenant was meant to preserve not just bloodlines, but knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual principles essential for guiding humanity through eras of upheaval. Elizabeth II's reign, spanning unprecedented technological, social, and political change, can be seen as fulfilling a modern aspect of this prophecy. The preservation of stability, tradition, and symbolic continuity during a period when ancient lineages and sacred knowledge might otherwise have been forgotten. The convergence of prophecy, ritual, and lineage paints a compelling picture. Elizabeth II was not merely a modern monarch. She was the living embodiment of centuries of hidden expectation, a nexus where mystical foresight, historical strategy, and sacred continuity intersected. Her coronation, reign, and public acts can be interpreted not only as political milestones, but as the unfolding fulfillment of a long-guarded covenant, one first entrusted to the Templars and carefully maintained through generations of guardianship. As the camera slowly pans across illuminated manuscripts, medieval carvings, and the royal regalia, the narrator intones in a low, deliberate tone. For centuries, the words of prophets and the carvings of hidden masters spoke of a lineage that would endure, a guardian who would carry forward a sacred trust. Elizabeth II, standing at the crossroads of history and prophecy, became that guardian, the living bridge between a hidden past and the unfolding present, a queen whose life echoed the whispered promises of centuries. The narrative now turns to secret societies and their possible influence on the preservation of sacred bloodlines, with particular attention to the ways these groups may have intersected with the monarchy. From the medieval Knights Templar to modern fraternal organizations, secret societies have historically functioned as custodians of knowledge, ritual, and lineage. While many of their practices remain obscure, historical records, esoteric manuscripts, and architectural clues suggest that these groups played a subtle but significant role in guiding, protecting, and legitimizing royal lines, including the lineage of Elizabeth II. Freemasonry, perhaps the most well-known of these societies, provides a compelling example. Its roots in Scotland, particularly through the Scottish Rite, link directly to the preservation of Templar philosophy and symbolic tradition. Lodges served not only as social and fraternal centers, but also as repositories of ritual knowledge, geometric symbolism, and moral code designed to ensure the continuity of sacred principles. Within these lodges, esoteric teachings emphasized lineage, duty, and the stewardship of hidden knowledge, principles that align closely with the preservation of sacred bloodlines in Europe. Other orders, such as the Rosicrucians, the Knights of Malta, and lesser-known chivalric societies, similarly acted as guardians of esoteric wisdom. Historical correspondence and archival documents indicate that members of these societies often maintained relationships with European nobility, advising, supporting, and, in some cases, influencing succession and ceremonial practices. Through these networks, knowledge of sacred lineage, rituals, and symbolic codes could be preserved even during times of political upheaval or persecution. In essence, secret societies acted as invisible scaffolding, ensuring that the continuity of certain bloodlines remained intact. The interaction between the British monarchy and these societies is subtle but significant. While the monarchy was never overtly a member of such organizations, many advisors, courtiers, and ceremonial officers had connections to lodges and orders. This indirect influence created an ecosystem in which the royal family could maintain continuity, access guidance, and participate in a symbolic network that extended far beyond public scrutiny. In this context, Elizabeth II's reign can be viewed as a culmination of centuries of covert stewardship, with secret societies acting as silent partners in the preservation of lineage and authority. Rituals and ceremonies within these societies often mirrored or influenced royal tradition. The use of geometric symbolism, initiatory rites, and oaths of fidelity bear striking resemblance to elements observed in coronations, state openings, and chivalric events. For example, the precise alignment of participants during the coronation ceremony, the order of ritual acts, and even the use of sacred regalia echo practices preserved in esoteric lodges. These parallels suggest that ceremonial aspects of monarchy may have been consciously or unconsciously shaped by traditions maintained within secret societies. Heraldry and symbolism also provide critical evidence. Many emblems found in royal coats of arms, badges, and ceremonial items incorporate geometric patterns, crosses, and celestial symbols prevalent in Masonic and Templar teachings. These symbols often serve dual purposes, publicly asserting legitimacy and authority, while privately signaling knowledge of hidden truths and sacred continuity to those attuned to the esoteric language. Elizabeth II's use and public display of these symbols, therefore, may not be merely decorative but part of a centuries-old dialogue with secret societies about lineage, duty, and guardianship. Even historical crises, such as wars, exiles, and political revolutions, seem to have been mitigated in ways that preserve lineage, suggesting that networks of secret societies may have acted strategically behind the scenes. Correspondences, encrypted manuscripts, and coded rituals indicate that members of these societies often sought to protect heirs, maintain alliances, and ensure continuity in the face of instability. In this way, Elizabeth II's uninterrupted reign may be seen as part of a broader pattern of careful preservation guided by discrete networks of knowledge and influence. The modern implications of these societies are equally compelling. While no public record confirms direct intervention in contemporary monarchy, their symbolic influence persists in ceremonial orders, royal patronages, and institutional structures. Through these subtle channels, the monarchy maintains continuity with centuries of esoteric tradition, linking the present to a hidden past. Elizabeth II, by virtue of her birth, education, and ceremonial role, became both the recipient and the custodian of this symbolic inheritance. As the camera pans across Scottish lodges, ancient manuscripts, and ceremonial regalia, the narrator intones in a low, contemplative voice. For centuries, secret societies watched, guided, and protected the threads of destiny woven into royal bloodlines. Elizabeth II did not merely inherit a throne. She inherited a covenant, a sacred trust carefully preserved through centuries of ritual, secrecy, and devotion. And in her life, that hidden network found its living witness. As the decades passed and the world around her transformed beyond recognition, Queen Elizabeth II remained a fixed point, a living emblem of continuity in an age obsessed with change. Her public image was one of composure, restraint, and tradition. Yet beneath that immovable surface, there was something far more enigmatic, a quiet alignment with forces older than monarchy itself. To those who studied her reign through the lens of esoteric history, Elizabeth was not merely a queen, but the latest vessel of a sacred current that had been flowing for nearly 1,000 years, a current that began with the Knights Templar, ran through the veins of the Plantagenets, the Stuarts, and the Tudors, and finally found refuge in the modern House of Windsor. Every photograph, every ceremony, every speech she gave was steeped in deliberate symbolism, like the pages of an illuminated manuscript written not for the masses, but for the initiated few who could still read its hidden language. Her composure, her mannerisms, even her measured silences seemed to echo a code of conduct not taught in royal schools but inherited from a more ancient order, a discipline of secrecy, stewardship, and service that the Templars once lived and died for. In the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, there were whispers that the Queen's advisors often referred to certain royal traditions as the old ways. These were rituals and oaths so ancient that even senior clergy had forgotten their origins. Among them was the night vigil, a pre-coronation rite said to have taken place in total solitude, where the monarch-to-be spent hours in prayer and contemplation before the crown jewels, the regalia that symbolized dominion over both the material and spiritual realms. Historians regard it as a remnant of medieval ceremony. But to students of esoteric tradition, it mirrors the Templar initiation, the solitary vigil before the altar, where a knight was said to confront his soul and pledge his life to divine service. It was this very fusion of sacred ritual and royal authority that gave the British monarchy its uncanny endurance. While empires collapsed and revolutions swept across continents, the crown survived, not through political strength, but through its aura of sanctity. This was no accident. The architects of monarchy understood the necessity of mystery. Without it, power becomes mechanical. With it, power becomes myth. The Templars knew this truth intimately. Their brotherhood was built on symbols, geometry, and silence, the same principles that defined Elizabeth's rule. Beneath the surface of ceremonial Britain, a subtle network of influence endured. The royal family maintained ties with several ancient chivalric orders, including the Order of the Garter, founded in 1348 but steeped in Templar iconography. The Garter's motto, Honi soit mal y pense, shame on him who thinks evil of it, reads almost like a veiled warning to those who would misinterpret the hidden workings of the divine plan. Even the structure of the order, limited to 24 knights, echoing the 24 elders of Revelation, carries unmistakable numerological resonance. It is through such institutions that the remnants of Templar philosophy continued to breathe beneath the royal mantle. As the 20th century unfolded, these ancient threads grew fainter in the public eye, but more concentrated in the private rituals of monarchy. Elizabeth's fascination with sacred music, her patronage of cathedral restoration projects, and her insistence on preserving archaic elements in royal ceremonies all point toward an intuitive understanding of continuity, that the crown's authority derives not from politics, but from participation in a lineage of sacred guardianship. She once remarked in a private letter to a bishop, "It is not the role of the sovereign to command faith, only to keep its light from being extinguished." That single sentence reveals more than any speech could. A belief that her role was custodial, protective, and bound to something larger than temporal rule. The Queen's coronation in 1953 was a moment of profound transformation, not only for Britain, but for the hidden lineage that traced its roots back to the Holy Land. The ceremony's choreography mirrored the Templar ritual of investiture, the purification with holy oil, the anointing in secrecy, the presentation of symbolic weapons and regalia. Even the throne on which she sat, the ancient coronation chair, was built to house the Stone of Scone, the so-called Stone of Destiny, which some legends claim was once part of Jacob's pillow, the stone upon which the patriarch dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven. To the uninitiated, these are relics of history. To the esotericist, they are instruments of alignment designed to anchor divine authority in human form. There are those who believe that on the day of her coronation, Elizabeth became not only Queen of England, but high custodian of a spiritual covenant first forged by the Templars under the vaults of Solomon's Temple. Within that hidden covenant was the understanding that certain bloodlines were chosen not for dominion, but for preservation, to guard the memory of the sacred sciences, the codes of divine architecture, and a knowledge of humanity's higher origin. Whether literal or symbolic, this idea forms the core of the so-called Templar bloodline theory. According to researchers of alternative history, the Templars intermarried with noble families across Europe after their suppression in 1307, embedding their legacy within royal houses. Through generations, this spiritual inheritance passed through the Stuarts and eventually into the House of Windsor. When Elizabeth ascended the throne, she became, knowingly or not, the living continuation of that bloodline. Her reign symbolized the survival of the ancient covenant through the storm of modernity. The Queen's demeanor often reflected an awareness of this silent burden. She embodied a paradox, the most visible woman on earth, yet the most unknowable. Biographers describe her as enigmatic, even to those closest to her. Her stillness, her refusal to express opinion, her disciplined speech, all evoke the sacred vows of secrecy the Templars once upheld. It was as though she were the guardian of a truth too delicate for words, a truth safeguarded not through revelation, but through presence. Certain scholars have pointed out peculiar coincidences that reinforce this impression. The date of her coronation, June 2nd, 1953, aligns astronomically with the rising of Sirius, the dog star, which in ancient Egypt symbolized divine kingship and the rebirth of light. The Templars revered Sirius as a celestial marker of divine cycles, linking it to their rituals of resurrection. That the coronation should coincide with such a celestial event could be chance, or a deliberate continuation of an ancient code of timing used to sanctify rulers through cosmic alignment. Even the Queen's personal emblems carry esoteric significance. Her favorite gemstone, the pearl, represents purity and hidden wisdom, qualities prized by both Templar mystics and early Christian initiates. The color scheme of her coronation robes, gold, white, and crimson, mirrors the triadic colors of Templar regalia, symbolizing spirit, soul, and body united under divine will. These echoes are too numerous, too precise, to dismiss as coincidence. During her reign, Elizabeth presided over the gradual unraveling of empire, the redefinition of monarchy, and the rise of a new world order based on communication and commerce rather than conquest. Yet through all this transformation, the crown's ancient symbols remained intact. The orb still represented the world under divine law. The scepter still denoted spiritual authority over temporal realms. The crown still radiated the geometry of sacred kingship. In maintaining these relics of a vanished age, Elizabeth seemed to declare, silently but firmly, that the spiritual foundation of civilization must not be forgotten, even as humanity marches into the technological unknown. Toward the end of her life, subtle gestures suggested a deepening of this inner awareness. Her Christmas addresses grew more contemplative, more metaphysical. She spoke often of light and service, of faith unseen but enduring. In her final years, she began referring to herself not as ruler, but as servant, a linguistic shift that resonates profoundly with Templar theology. The Knights, too, called themselves servants of the temple, bound to humility even in power. It is as though, with age, Elizabeth's public mask of monarchy gave way to the spiritual archetype beneath it, the guardian, the vessel, the keeper of the flame. After her passing, researchers began re-examining her personal archives, hoping to find correspondence or artifacts hinting at her awareness of the Templar legacy. Among them was a set of letters exchanged with a senior cleric in Jerusalem concerning the restoration of a small chapel near the site of Solomon's temple. Officially, these were discussions about charity funding. Unofficially, they have been interpreted as symbolic gestures, a monarch subtly reaffirming her bond with the sacred origin of her supposed bloodline. The most compelling evidence, however, lies not in documents but in the pattern of her life, a pattern that reflects the Templar triad of faith, duty, and silence. Like the Templars, she faced public suspicion and misunderstanding, yet remained unyielding in purpose. Like them, she built no empire for herself, but guarded a greater inheritance, the continuity of meaning in an age that forgets. In this sense, Elizabeth II becomes more than a historical figure. She becomes an archetype, the embodiment of the eternal feminine in service to divine order. Just as the Templars revered the feminine principle through their devotion to the Virgin Mary and the concept of Sophia, divine wisdom, so too did Elizabeth manifest that same grace and restraint. Her reign was both sword and chalice, authority tempered by compassion, secrecy balanced with service. Even her chosen burial site speaks in the language of symbolism. Windsor Castle, resting on ancient ley lines that intersect with other sites of power across Britain, has long been considered a spiritual nexus, a place where heaven and earth converge. By resting there, Elizabeth aligned herself once more with the geometric lattice of sacred geography that the Templars mapped across the world. Her body became part of that living network, her spirit another node in the great tapestry of continuity. As the world watched her funeral procession wind through London, few realized they were witnessing the closing of a sacred cycle. The carriage, the regalia, the solemn hymns, All were not merely acts of mourning, but rituals of transference. The sacred authority that once flowed through her was being symbolically withdrawn, sealed, and prepared for renewal. This was the final echo of the Templar vow, the promise to guard divine knowledge through time, passing it only to those worthy of its weight. Her death did not break the lineage. It completed a circle. For those who look beyond politics and pageantry, Elizabeth's 70 years on the throne formed the invisible bridge between medieval mystery and modern destiny. The Templar bloodline, if such a thing truly exists, has not ended with her. It has simply changed form, awaiting its next manifestation in the hidden architecture of the world to come. In the quiet aftermath of her passing, as her name joins the long procession of monarchs, one is left with an unsettling question. What was she truly protecting? Was it the institution of monarchy or something older, a secret that began in the deserts of Jerusalem and has survived, veiled in ceremony, through centuries of empire and upheaval? Perhaps the answer lies not in what she said or did, but in what she never revealed. For like the Templars before her, Elizabeth II seemed to understand that the greatest truths are not declared from thrones, but guarded in silence. And in that silence, serene, immovable, eternal, the ancient covenant still breathes, waiting for the world to remember. As the long reign of Queen Elizabeth II drew to its solemn close, the world mourned the passing of a monarch. But for those who look deeper into history's undercurrents, her death carried meanings far beyond politics or ceremony. The final chapter of her life was wrapped in symbols, ancient, deliberate, and strangely resonant with the hidden traditions that have shaped the monarchy for centuries. Every gesture, every ritual, every object placed before her coffin seemed to echo the veiled language of the Templars, as if the secret order was bidding farewell to its last great guardian. When the Queen's coffin rested upon the catafalque in Westminster Hall, draped in the royal standard, the crown, orb, and scepter gleamed above it, symbols of sovereignty, but also of something older. The crown represented divine authority, the orb the world under sacred rule, and the scepter the power of spiritual judgment. In Templar symbology, these three correspond to the triad of power, spirit, matter, and wisdom, uniting heaven, earth, and human will. As the crown was lifted from her coffin and placed upon the altar, it signified the passing of this sacred triad from one age to another, the end of a lineage bound by a secret covenant. At the center of her funeral imagery stood the Stone of Scone, the ancient coronation stone brought from Scotland, believed by legend to have biblical origins. Some trace it to the Stone of Jacob, others to relics preserved by the Templars after the Crusades. Beneath the anointed monarch's throne, this stone has witnessed every British coronation for centuries, an unspoken link between the divine right of kings and the sacred relic traditions of the Middle Ages. In Elizabeth's final rites, the stone once again took its place, silent but potent, as if marking the completion of a cycle that began with the Templar refuge in Scotland 700 years ago. The black attire worn by the royal family during her funeral was more than a sign of mourning. Within certain esoteric interpretations, black represents the alchemical stage of Nigredo, the death before transformation, the purification of spirit before rebirth. It is the darkness that precedes illumination. The Queen's passing, then, symbolically became a rite of transformation not only for the monarchy, but for the hidden current of sacred tradition that flowed beneath it. The ancient order's long shadow had reached its final twilight, preparing the way for a new manifestation of its power, quieter, more subtle, yet no less enduring. The meticulous choreography of the funeral procession carried echoes of Masonic and Templar geometry. The arrangement of guards, the number of steps taken, the alignment of the coffin as it passed through the arches, all reflected a pattern of sacred proportion. Even the placement of the crown upon the imperial cushion followed a geometric logic that scholars of esoteric ritual recognize as an invocation of balance between the temporal and the divine. Those familiar with the ancient rites of knighthood and initiation could not help but see, hidden within the spectacle of modern ceremony, the shadow of older mysteries, the silent acknowledgement of a brotherhood that has long guided the course of kings. The Queen's personal insignia, too, whispered of continuity. Her royal cipher, the stylized E2R, contained an unseen symmetry, its structure aligning with Templar cross geometry when overlaid. Her favorite brooch, worn during crucial state occasions, bore a design resembling the Maltese cross, a direct descendant of the Templar emblem. Even the language used by clergy during her funeral, invoking her as servant of the light, echoed the medieval phrasing of the Templar vows, to serve the light of the temple, now and forever. Whether coincidence or design, the symbols spoke the same ancient tone. When the crown was finally lowered into the vault, followed by the breaking of the Lord Chamberlain's wand of office, a ritual symbolizing the end of royal service, it marked more than the closing of a reign. To those who believe in the hidden continuity of sacred orders, this was the sealing of a chapter that had lasted for nearly a millennium. The wand, once broken, becomes a relic, a sign that one vessel of divine authority has been emptied, awaiting the next to be filled. In that quiet gesture, one could sense the faint echo of Templar ceremony, where the breaking of sword or seal marked the completion of an oath fulfilled. Beyond the visible rites, the timing of her death, coinciding with shifting global tides, a new order rising in Europe, and renewed interest in the old mysteries, seemed almost prophetic. For decades, conspiracy theorists and esoteric scholars alike had spoken of a transition foretold in coded texts, the end of the Grail Queen's era, and the beginning of a time when hidden truths would emerge from the archives of both church and crown. Her passing, viewed through that lens, became a symbolic release, the loosening of an ancient lock that guarded humanity's forgotten heritage. Publicly, Elizabeth was a figure of stability, continuity, and grace, but esoterically, she may have represented the final expression of a royal archetype born in the fires of the Crusades. Her lineage, carefully preserved and guided through centuries, carried the residue of Templar vows and Grail traditions. The bloodline of light, as certain mystics call it, had maintained its thread through chaos, war, and empire, always re-emerging beneath different names and symbols. With her departure, the question lingers, does that sacred current still flow in her successors, or has it retreated into the shadows once more, waiting for another age? The coronation of her successor revived these questions. The same rituals were repeated, the oil of anointing, the invocation of divine right. Yet something felt subtly altered. The world had changed. The mythic aura had dimmed. It was as if the old order had completed its purpose, and a new, uncertain era had begun. But those who study the arcane patterns of power know that symbols do not vanish. They transform. The Templar spirit, once hidden in armor and then in crowns, might now move silently through modern institutions, finance, technology, or unseen networks of influence. The end of the Queen's reign, therefore, was not an ending but a metamorphosis. In the hush that followed her burial, one could almost sense a collective pause, a silence that carried the weight of centuries. The monarch who had embodied continuity was gone, and with her went the last living link to the ancient covenant between throne and temple. The rituals of mourning had closed the circle. Yet somewhere, deep within the hidden vaults of Windsor or the sealed libraries of the crown, the documents and emblems of that forgotten order remain. The torch has not gone out. It has merely changed hands. The hidden symbolism surrounding the death of Queen Elizabeth II, then, is not a matter of coincidence or conspiracy alone. It is the language of history speaking through ritual. Her life and death formed the arc of a myth that began with knights in white mantles and red crosses, carrying the relics of Jerusalem across the sea. That myth wove itself into royal crests, into coronation oaths, into the very architecture of Westminster Abbey. And as the Queen was laid to rest, that story reached its moment of silence, the breath before a new chapter. Was Elizabeth II simply a monarch of her time? Or was she, knowingly or not, the custodian of the final mystery, the one that began in the temples of Solomon and ended beneath the vaulted stones of Windsor? The symbols suggest the latter, though history will never confirm it. Perhaps that uncertainty is the truest expression of her legacy, the enduring enigma of a queen whose death closed not only an era of empire, but the secret chapter of an ancient brotherhood's long design. The story of Queen Elizabeth II's Hidden Templar Bloodline does not simply vanish with her death. Instead, it ripples through time like a whisper carried across the ages, faint yet persistent, echoing from the sacred halls of ancient temples to the gilded corridors of modern palaces. Her passing marked not merely the end of an era, but the closing of a sacred cycle, a circle that began long before her birth and, perhaps, long before Britain itself existed. The notion of a divine lineage, woven through centuries of power, has haunted human imagination since the dawn of monarchy. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of Byzantium, rulers sought legitimacy through the sacred, through the claim that their blood was not entirely of this world. In Europe, this ideal took form through the concept of the Rex Deus, the King of God, a sovereign who ruled not by the sword, but by a covenant older than any nation. The Templars believed that this covenant could be inherited, protected, and passed through generations, a thread of divine will embedded in human blood. When whispers arose that Elizabeth II descended from this sacred current, the idea felt less like a theory and more like the fulfillment of an ancient pattern repeating itself once again. Her reign was defined by composure, dignity, and secrecy, virtues that mirror the very essence of the Templar Code. The Queen never revealed her inner thoughts, never broke the stillness that surrounded her. That silence, to many, was her greatest mystery. It was not the silence of indifference, but of guardianship, the quiet of someone entrusted with something beyond words. The rituals that marked her life, the coronation, the anointing, the oaths sworn in candlelight, were echoes of older vows, the same rites performed by knights who once took up arms under the banner of the Temple Cross. During her coronation in 1953, Elizabeth was not simply crowned. She was consecrated. The oil that touched her forehead, chest, and hands was said to be infused with ingredients drawn from ancient formulae, preserved since the time of Solomon. The ceremony's most sacred moment, the anointing, was hidden from public view, concealed beneath a golden canopy. Even in the age of television, this fragment of medieval secrecy was maintained. To the initiated, this was more than symbolism. It was ritual continuity, a link to the moment when the Templars themselves were initiated into their divine vocation beneath the Temple Mount. Throughout her reign, the Queen's relationship to religion was uniquely ambivalent. Publicly, she was defender of the faith, the supreme governor of the Church of England, a role established by Henry VIII, yet symbolic of the fusion between spiritual and temporal power. But privately, her faith was something far older and more encompassing. Accounts from clergy and attendants describe her fascination with ancient Christian traditions, her curiosity about relics, her insistence that certain prayers, long out of official use, be preserved in royal ceremonies. These details, seemingly trivial, take on new meaning when viewed through the lens of the Templar inheritance, a faith not defined by doctrine, but by the preservation of sacred knowledge through time. The Templars were not merely warriors or monks. They were custodians of mysteries, initiates of geometry, astronomy, and divine proportion. Their commanderies were built on sacred alignments, their rituals encoded with mathematical precision. If one overlays these same principles onto the architecture of British monarchy, startling patterns emerge. The coronation route from Westminster Hall to the Abbey mirrors the Templar floor plan of the Temple Church in London. The positioning of the royal orb, scepter, and crown during coronation aligns with the triadic geometry found in Templar sigils. Even the Queen's personal coat of arms bears echoes of Templar iconography. Lions of Judah, crosses petit, and symbolic creatures guarding a hidden truth. The connection between the British crown and secret orders has long been documented, yet rarely discussed openly. From the 18th century onward, monarchs were patrons of Freemasonry, the supposed successor of Templar traditions. Many royal family members were initiated into Masonic lodges, continuing the tradition of esoteric guardianship. Freemasonry itself preserved fragments of Templar ritual, the oaths, the symbols, the reverence for Solomon's temple as the source of divine architecture. Elizabeth II's father, George VI, was known to have deep respect for Masonic principles, and during her reign, the royal household quietly maintained affiliations with several fraternal organizations that trace their origins to Templar philosophy. In this way, the royal family did not merely inherit wealth or privilege. They inherited the spiritual DNA of the Western mystery tradition. But what was the true purpose of this lineage? Was it merely symbolic, a way to infuse monarchy with mythic legitimacy? Or was there something deeper, a hidden mission that continued beneath the surface of statecraft? Some esoteric scholars suggest that the Templar bloodline serves as the living conduit of an ancient vow to protect the wisdom of the old world until humanity is ready to understand it. The British Empire, seen through this lens, was not only a political entity, but an instrument for dispersing that hidden knowledge, spreading Templar geometry, architecture, and philosophy across continents. Cathedrals, universities, and legal institutions built under royal charter all carry echoes of this influence. The empire may have dissolved, but its deeper function, to seed the world with the remnants of sacred order, may still be unfolding. Elizabeth's reign, then, becomes the closing chapter of that design. Her rule began in the shadow of World War and ended in the dawn of global interconnection. The shift from empire to network, from secrecy to transparency. Yet she remained the constant, a bridge between the mystical past and the digital future. Her restraint, her silence, her refusal to reveal the inner workings of monarchy can be seen as the last stand of an ancient principle, that certain truths must remain hidden, guarded until humanity is ready. In an era obsessed with exposure, she was the final keeper of mystery. After her death, attention turned once again to the royal archives, a vast, largely inaccessible repository of letters, maps, and artifacts stretching back centuries. Among these collections are rumored to be Templar manuscripts rescued from destruction in 1307, along with genealogical records tracing noble bloodlines to Jerusalem and beyond. Scholars have long speculated that within these sealed chambers lie documents linking the crown to secret orders across Europe, from the Rosicrucians to the Priory of Chauen. The fact that these archives remain closed to the public only fuels the legend that Elizabeth II, knowingly or not, was the custodian of secrets capable of reshaping history. Yet the mystery of the Templar bloodline is not only about what is hidden, but about what is revealed through symbolism. Consider the imagery surrounding the Queen's final years, the sapphire brooch she often wore, a stone historically associated with divine wisdom and the celestial order. The choice of Windsor Castle, built on ancient ley lines, as her final resting place, and the fact that her reign lasted 70 years, a number sacred to the Templars, representing spiritual completion and the cycle of divine creation. These coincidences form a pattern, a quiet language spoken through the geometry of time. In Templar teachings, death is never an ending. It is initiation, the passage from visible to invisible service. The Knights believed that those who held true to their vows would continue their work beyond life, guiding humanity through unseen means. If this philosophy endured within the royal bloodline, then Elizabeth's death was not the extinguishing of a light, but its transference to another realm. The funeral rituals, so carefully choreographed, may have been not only acts of mourning, but ceremonies of transformation, the sealing of an era and the awakening of another. When the crown was removed from her coffin and placed upon the altar, it was not just a gesture of succession, but a symbolic release of sacred authority. The orb, representing the world under divine law, and the scepter, symbolizing justice, were laid aside, their power withdrawn into the spiritual plane until the next vessel was prepared. In that moment, the ancient Templar vow found its completion. The promise to preserve divine wisdom through the ages, fulfilled in silence and ceremony. In reflection, Elizabeth II's legacy transcends the bounds of monarchy. Whether or not her lineage truly descends from Templar blood, she embodied the essence of the archetype, the ruler as guardian of the sacred. Her composure in crisis, her unshakable devotion to duty, and her quiet acknowledgement of mystery placed her within a continuum that began with the warrior monks of the 12th century. She was both the last of the old order and the first of the new, a monarch who held the ancient light long enough for it to be seen, before releasing it into the collective consciousness of humanity. The Templar bloodline, as legend describes it, is not merely a chain of genetics, but a transmission of purpose. It is the continuity of an idea, that enlightenment is achieved through service, and that power must bow to the sacred. Elizabeth II's life was a living manifestation of this principle, a modern vessel for an ancient covenant. Her reign demonstrated that mystery still has a place in an age of logic, and that symbols still carry the power to unite nations under something greater than themselves. Now, as her name joins the long lineage of those who have carried this hidden torch, the question remains, what becomes of the sacred bloodline in a world that no longer believes in sacredness? Perhaps its form will change, from throne to idea, from dynasty to consciousness. Perhaps the real inheritance of the Templars lies not in crowns or castles, but in the awakening of humanity to its own divine potential. In this sense, Elizabeth's reign was not the final chapter, but the great unveiling. The revelation that the light once guarded by knights and monarchs now resides within everyone. The legacy of the Templar bloodline endures not because it is proven, but because it speaks to the timeless truth that humanity yearns to protect what is holy, even in secret. The Queen's life and death form the last verse of an ancient hymn, a melody of loyalty, silence, and grace that continues to resonate beneath the noise of history. And perhaps, when the world grows quiet again, that melody will be heard once more, reminding us that every age has its keepers of light, and that the sacred flame, though hidden, never goes out. In the hush that follows revelation, there is a different kind of silence, not the quiet of ignorance, but the stillness of knowing. When we peel away the layers of myth, symbol, and secrecy surrounding Queen Elizabeth II and the supposed Templar bloodline, what remains is not merely a conspiracy, but a story, an archetype that stretches back to the dawn of civilization itself. It is a story about humanity's need to connect the present with the sacred past, to see divine order hidden within the chaos of kings and empires. And it is here, in that space between history and legend, that Elizabeth's legacy assumes a dimension far greater than her crown, her lineage, or her empire. For centuries, power has been intertwined with faith. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the Caesars of Rome, rulers have claimed descent from the gods or their chosen messengers. The Templars, too, sought that same divine sanction, not for conquest, but for preservation of the sacred. They believed the world was built upon a pattern, a geometry of destiny that linked heaven and earth. Their symbols, the cross, the chalice, the twin pillars, were not mere emblems but maps of metaphysical truth. When we trace these same symbols through European heraldry and royal ritual, we find the unbroken thread of an ancient philosophy. That power is not legitimate unless it mirrors the divine structure of the cosmos. The British monarchy, especially under Elizabeth II, embodied that principle in its purest form. Her reign was ritualized continuity, the appearance of stability in a world unraveling at its edges. Yet beneath that stability lay something deeper, something almost mystical. The notion that her authority was not political, but sacred. Every act of the crown, the coronation, the oaths, the royal blessings, can be read as an echo of the old Templar creed. Non nobis domini, non nobis sed nomini tua de gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, but unto thy name give glory. To those who sense the undercurrents of history, Elizabeth's life seems to have been shaped by unseen hands, as though fulfilling an ancient prophecy written not in ink, but in blood. She reigned over a world shifting from empire to global network, from sacred monarchies to secular governance. Yet the symbols of her power remained medieval: swords, stones, anointing oils, and blessings whispered in secret. Why, in an age of satellites and science, would a nation still anoint its ruler as though she were divinely chosen? Perhaps because the ritual preserves something humanity cannot bear to lose: the bridge between heaven and earth, between myth and meaning. Some have speculated that the Queen was aware of her symbolic role in the Great Continuum. There are hints, subtle gestures, moments of silence during state ceremonies, the careful preservation of relics and archives within the royal collection. She was known to study ancient manuscripts, to maintain private chapels rarely seen by the public, and to keep certain heirlooms shrouded in secrecy. These gestures suggest not ignorance, but guardianship, the quiet stewardship of mysteries that predate even her crown. When the Templars were hunted across Europe in the 14th century, many of their records and treasures vanished without trace. Legends say that some were spirited away to Scotland, to the abbeys and castles that would later form the roots of British Freemasonry. Other tales claim that the order's greatest secret, the Arcanum Domini, the Lord's secret, was not an artifact but a lineage, a bloodline that carried within it the divine spark the Templars had sworn to protect. That bloodline, some say, merged with royal houses, ensuring that the sacred current would continue through generations of crowned heads and noble heirs. In this telling, the Queen was not merely sovereign but vessel, the living continuation of a vow sworn beneath the Temple of Solomon. Whether one believes this or not, it is undeniable that the idea itself has power. Myths survive because they express truths that history cannot articulate. The legend of the Templar bloodline speaks to the enduring belief that the divine walks among us, hidden within flesh and lineage, guiding humanity from behind the veil. The British monarchy's ancient rites, its guarded archives, and its unyielding symbolism all point toward a deliberate preservation of that myth, a silent acknowledgement that some stories are too sacred to end. But the question that lingers after the Queen's passing is one of succession, not merely of throne, but of guardianship. If she was indeed the custodian of this hidden inheritance, what becomes of it now? Does the lineage continue unbroken, passed quietly to the next sovereign through secret rites performed behind locked doors? Or was her death the closing of a circle, the end of a covenant that has lasted nearly 1,000 years? The answer may lie in the nature of secrecy itself. The Templars believed that truth could not be destroyed, only concealed, buried beneath layers of symbol until the world was ready to understand it. Perhaps the same can be said of Elizabeth's legacy. The secret of the Templar bloodline may no longer reside in any single person or family, but in the collective consciousness of humanity. The myth has served its purpose to remind us that there is divinity in the human lineage, that sacredness does not belong to temples or thrones alone. As scholars and seekers continue to unearth fragments of the past, lost manuscripts, coded insignias, and forgotten rites, the threads begin to converge. The geometry of ancient cathedrals, the layout of royal tombs, the alignment of sacred sites across Europe, all reflect the same pattern. It is as if the Templars encoded their vision of divine order into the very fabric of the world, ensuring that even when their names were erased, their truth would remain. Elizabeth's reign, with its quiet symmetry and enduring grace, mirrored that geometry, her life forming the final arc of a design begun long before her birth. If we listen closely, the echoes of that design still speak. They resound in the chants of coronations, in the heraldic crests of ancient houses, in the hidden language of stained glass and cathedral stone. The message is always the same: that light is eternal, that truth survives suppression, and that lineage, whether of blood or spirit, is the vessel through which divine purpose moves through time. In this way, the Queen's passing is not an end, but a transmutation. The energy once held within her reign disperses into the collective soul of humanity, awakening the awareness that every human being carries the same potential for sacred sovereignty. In the quiet reflection that follows her story, one realizes that the Templar bloodline may never have been about genetics at all. It may have been a metaphor, a teaching hidden in plain sight. The blood of the Templars is the essence of spiritual will, the inner fire that refuses to die. To say that Elizabeth II carried this blood is to recognize that she embodied that enduring principle, the fusion of duty and faith, of worldly restraint and unseen wisdom. She was, in her way, the living emblem of the Templar ideal, the monarch who ruled not through fear or ambition, but through quiet adherence to a higher law. And yet, even the greatest symbols must evolve. As new generations inherit the throne, the meaning of monarchy transforms. The Templar ideal may no longer need a crown to survive. It now exists in the minds and hearts of those who seek truth beyond appearances. The age of hidden orders and veiled rituals is giving way to an age of revelation, not through disclosure, but through understanding. The ancient mysteries are not lost. They're simply being reinterpreted. What once required secrecy may now find expression through knowledge, empathy, and the pursuit of wisdom itself. The Queen's death marked a threshold, not a conclusion. On one side lies the world of hierarchy and ritual, of sacred secrecy and guarded power. On the other lies a future in which the sacred becomes democratic, where the Templar flame passes not to kings and queens, but to all who recognize their inner sovereignty. In this way, Elizabeth's final act was not the end of the bloodline, but its release, the transformation of a guarded inheritance into a universal potential. Still, the mystery endures. Somewhere within the archives of the crown, sealed beneath layers of classification, there may yet lie the remnants of the Templar connection. Old parchments, relics, or genealogical charts tracing the bloodlines of Europe back to Jerusalem. Perhaps within those vaults rests the proof that myth and history once shared the same breath. But even if those documents were revealed, they would only confirm what the heart already knows, that humanity has always sought the divine within itself, disguising that truth in the language of lineage and royalty. As night falls over Windsor Castle and the bells of Westminster fade into the distance, one can imagine the unseen procession, not of mourners, but of spirits, the long lineage of guardians who came before, standing watch in silence. The Templar Knights, the Grail Keepers, the alchemists, the mystics, all united in the invisible order that transcends time. In their ranks, perhaps, walks the spirit of the queen herself, no longer bound by crown or ceremony, but part of the eternal fellowship of those who kept the light alive in an age of shadows. The revelation of the Templar bloodline is not a conclusion, but an invitation to see history not as a record of events, but as a mirror of consciousness. The line between legend and truth blurs, and through that haze emerges something far greater: the understanding that we are all heirs to the same mystery. The sacred flame that once passed through knights and queens now rests within every soul that seeks truth with humility and courage. The temple is no longer a fortress of stone, nor a dynasty of blood. It is the heart awakened to the divine order within itself. And so, as the story of the Templar bloodline reaches its quiet end, the circle closes where it began, with a vow whispered in secrecy, beneath the shadow of ancient walls. Non nobis, domini, non nobis, sed nomini tua de gloriam. Not unto us, but unto the eternal light. The queen may have been its final guardian, but the light she carried, the light of knowledge, of continuity, of sacred purpose, now belongs to all. In the end, the true legacy of Queen Elizabeth II and the Hidden Templar bloodline is not the preservation of power, but the remembrance of meaning. It is the realization that behind every crown lies a story, behind every ritual a truth, and behind every secret the same unyielding hope, that the divine spark, however hidden, endures. And though the queen is gone, the current she embodied still flows, quiet, unseen, eternal, guiding those who dare to seek it. For the temple was never destroyed, and the bloodline was never lost. They live on, within us, waiting for the world to remember.